Welcome to Parenting Decoded, a podcast for practical approaches to parenting. I'm Mary Eschen. In the last few episodes, you might have noticed how much I'm emphasizing connecting with our kids. It's a huge deal. If you want a kid to do something, having a connection matters. The trick is figuring out how to build a secure connection that lasts more than 15 minutes, maybe even a lifetime. Achieving that level of trust and attachment is what I want to delve into in this podcast. I am so blessed to have an amazing resource for all of you who just released her new book, Raising Securely Attached Kids, Eli Harwood. Eli is a licensed therapist and has a social media following under the handle Attachment Nerd. She's into this stuff in a big way. Welcome,
Thank you so
Eli.
much. So good to be here, Mary.
I'm so honored. Hey, attachment theory and everything has been around for a really long time, but you sort of take a different tact of it toward it. Can you tell me about what secure attachment is versus the classic attachment stuff?
Yeah. Well, attachment theory has been around since the 60s, but I wouldn't say that accessible information around attachment theory has been around all that long. And so one of my passions is helping people understand why attachment matters so much. And in specific, okay, what is it I need to do as a caregiver to give my kids a secure attachment? Because from the data, we know that's kind of the key. That's the big advantage. All kids have attachments. The question is the quality of those relationships. So I wrote this book because I want as many parents as possible to understand, oh, these are the things that I can be doing within myself, within my relationship, within my discipline practices, whatever, so that my kids feel securely attached to me.
And one of the things that in reading your book, I was really impressed that you went over was how many of us might not have been raised with secure attachments that can kind of mess up our ability to attach with our kids. And you go over that so well in the book. One of the things I wanted to cover was in your book, you go over the 3 pitfalls of attachment. And one is mistaking control for protection, mistaking permissiveness for protection, and then mistaking dominance for protection. Can you kind of walk us through some of those ideas about how they
Yeah.
mess up with our attachments?
So, as a species, having a caregiver in our lives who is attuned to us, who cares about what's going on with us, who we have a connection with, is the greatest form of protection that we have. Because if our kids intuitively sense that we can be there for them effectively, they come to us when they feel distressed and overwhelmed. And not just when they're 2 years old and there's a bee in the room, right? But when they're 15 and they're dealing with some form of harassment, or they're struggling to feel confident in who they are and they're having some mental health issues. We really want our kids to have the instinct or the urge to seek us out when they're overwhelmed or distressed. And what I'm talking about when I talk about these pitfalls is some of these mythologies that I would say are trauma born that we can inherit in our mindsets about protecting our children. So a permissiveness pitfall would be thinking that our primary job is to keep our children comfortable. So we conflate comfort with safety. So we think, oh my gosh, my kid's upset. I've done something wrong. I need to make sure they're never upset. And then we move the boundaries instead of keeping a solid sense of guidance for our kids and having compassion for them at the same time, which looks different. The dominance pitfall is sort of this idea that I'm going to show my kids that nobody's going to hurt them. And if anybody tries to hurt them, like I'm going to show them that they really messed up and, they're going to end up in the gutter or whatever. And while that might feel like protection to us, it's actually just showing our children that we will lose control if someone has lost control with them. And so that actually makes it harder for kids to tell us when something really serious or chronic is happening, because now they're not only afraid based on the way that this other person is hurting them, but now they're afraid that if we know about it, that we will also get hurt because we'll get in danger. Maybe we would get put in jail or something awful could happen. So it's not actually good protection for kids to feel like we will lose our minds if someone hurts them. And then I would say that, other ideas, this helicopter right? We're just kind of staying on top of them 24/7, kind of, we're going to make sure that nothing ever happens to them. And that has many downfalls. One of them being that it makes it hard for our kids to trust us because they sense our anxiety. So if something's happening in their world, they're afraid that the, helicopter is going to get more intense and surround them more, as opposed to, I need some help regulating. I need some help working through this. My caregiver will come in and be a supportive resource for me. It's like, oh no, I'm going to lose even more of my freedom. And the thing I very much need to grow and develop, which is opportunities to go out in the world and do things on my own. So we want to instead have a connection approach to our kids, which is showing them, hey, I can hold boundaries with you to keep you safe, and I can release you into the world at developmentally appropriate levels so that you can go out there and figure things out. And I can handle it. When big, hard, scary, overwhelming, or weird things happen, I will be there for you. I will be here, and we can work through this together.
Yeah. Where I live in Silicon Valley, there's plenty of helicopter parents, and I was certainly one of them. And it just amazes me. I mean, luckily I was able to, by middle school, I was able to figure this out and able to really be able to change my attachment. And the thing is that that attachment that I had with my son when he was younger, was nurturing and everything, but I wasn't releasing him to make his own mistakes. And so he thought the world was not good.
Right.
He thought not
Yeah.
like he wasn't secure. And so he was tentative and he was just not, when things went wrong, he would look for someone else to blame about why things weren't going well. And so my attachment to him was just messed up, and I just needed to let him own his own life. And I'm so blessed. I'm so thankful that I came across via Love and Logic Parenting, but all parenting, the good parenting is the same.
Yeah.
It's like, you got to let your kids make mistakes and be there lovingly and in a secure, attached way. And it's like,
I love that you stumbled upon that.
And it's been a great journey.
I love that you stumbled upon it. And I just want to say to anyone else who's out there having that experience where you're like, I'm scared. I'm scared about hard things happening to my kid. And so I'm using fear as the teacher, right? Because that's what you were doing. You weren't doing that because you didn't care. You did it much. And you hadn't yet had anyone help you through your fear. So I would just say, like, if you recognize that, that's a great opportunity to go, oh, I need some help and support to work through these fears I'm having. And let me tell you, it's scary being a parent. They don't warn you that. That's not on the label. Like, by the way, you're now going to imagine really horrible, catastrophic things happening to your child at every stage of their life. And you have to figure out how to navigate an awareness of their fragility and their vulnerability and their humanness, and maintain a connection to their durability, to their capacity for resilience that we are all inborn with.
Right. And you see, especially in your practice, I would think, but you talk about it in your book too, about how much anxiety it has been passed on into our kids because we're all lovingly worried about our children. And how does a parent move towards that secure? One of the parts of your book, you call it the Secure Parent Conflict Code of Conduct. And I love how you have that title for it, because it's like, oops, sometimes we don't listen so good, and sometimes we're not so calm. And you wanted to, I don't know if you can walk us through it, or, like our kid comes to us with a problem. Oh, I can't believe the teacher's so mean, or my friend was mean, or, it's like I got a bad grade or something like that. How would you recommend that a securely attached parent approach that child?
Well, the first thing we have to do is we have to do a little bit of legwork on our mentalities about conflict, whether they're having conflict with us or someone else, which is, what do I believe about conflict? And usually those beliefs are formed around our early experiences with conflict. If we had conflict with our caregivers, what happened? Or if our caregivers were having conflict with each other or with someone else, what did we learn? And most of us tend to learn things like, these are insecure experiences. So if you had an insecure experience, you didn't have the model of parents who had secure attachment themselves, you probably learned conflict is dangerous. It gets eruptive and explosive, or conflict is to be avoided. It's dangerous, so don't engage it. Make sure everybody's always happy and peaceful all the time. right? Or conflict could lead to abandonment. If you do something wrong, the people in your life are going to cut you off, whether that's emotionally or literally. So when we enter a conflict situation with our kids, we want to be aware of what past models of conflict are in my nervous system as this thing is being engaged for my child. And then we want to shift towards what I call a discovery mindset. So our kid is experiencing something, or we and our child are experiencing it together. What are the underlying needs that are coming up? The conflict is like telling us, hey, there's a need here that hasn't been met, whether that's a need within our child or within their relationship or within our relationship with them. What's the need here? So I'll give you an example, a real life example from this morning in my life. This morning, my sweet son, my 9-year-old, woke up and he did not want to go to school. I mean, he was having capital A anxiety and dread about going to school. And that was a multifaceted conflict because
Wait, you're a therapist. Your kids are supposed to be perfect.
Of course they're not. You know what though? I love that you said that, because I think so many of us have this like weird expectation that if we do it a certain way or we do it the right way, that our kids will never suffer, never struggle, never have complex personalities or dynamics in their life. And that's just hogwash. It's not true. Our goal is not for our kids to never struggle. It's our goal for our kids to understand that they don't have to struggle alone. That's our goal. So, he's having a meltdown, and he actually slept in my bed last night because my husband's out of town. And so that's like a special little, he gets to sleep in there. And so he's in my bed, and the there's multiple layers to the conflict. One is for me is like, I have to work. The other is truancy laws. You do have to go, right? And I do want you to be able to thrive and grow. I also have my, twin daughters that we're getting ready for them to go to their school. Right? So there's a lot of like potential for this to go south, right? For me to sort of dig into my own defensiveness and react. So what I always think is, how can I be responsive instead of reactive? And being responsive doesn't mean that I am agreeing to whatever my child is asking for or doing. It means I'm responding to the emotions. So, he's wrapped up in his blanket. He put his head under the blanket. He's screaming, I'm not going to school. I'm not doing it. And I feel in my body that natural instinct to be like, kind of cut off, like, well, you are. So get your butt out of bed and get dressed because we're going. I mean, I feel that. But instead, I take a deep breath and I remember what it was like to be a kid in a moment of anxiety. It's awful. It's overwhelming. He's new to anxiety. I think his hormones are turning on. And I just laid next to him. I just wrapped my arms around him and I said, oh, buddy, I'm so sorry that you're feeling this overwhelmed. This is an awful feeling. This like panicky dread feeling you're having of like, I can't do this. Like, that's a horrible feeling. And he didn't say anything and I didn't say anything for a good, probably minute after that. I just held him. I just let him feel my presence and my acceptance of the truth that he's overwhelmed in that moment. Right. And then it's sort of this back and forth as I'm holding the limit of, we are going to go to school. And I'm not holding that limit because I'm like, want him to suffer more. I'm holding it because I know he needs to see that he can handle. Sorry, that was my cat. I'm holding that limit because he needs to know that he actually can face this thing he's worried about and be okay. And so we're doing sort of a dance of, I'm saying, I'm here, I feel you, I accept your feeling. So I'm with you in your feelings, and I'm with myself in my parent wisdom. I know you're going to be able to handle it. I know he has a safe teacher who is kind and from all that I know so far, a really lovely human. I know he has friends at school, right? I know he's not being bullied. Again, all things that I can say with some confidence because we've talked about it. And I'm being curious. So what's going on? So at some point I say, is there anything specific you can pinpoint about what the worry is filled with? What is the worry filled with? Is it filled with experience, whatever? And he was able to acknowledge, I've never had a boy teacher before, and I haven't made a connection with him yet. I thought, wow, what a brave thing. And then he said, and of all my 4 other teachers at the school anymore, which is true. His kindergarten teacher, his first grade teacher, and his third grade teacher all moved on to different schools. So he's feeling this like kind of my caregivers, the people I trust and know and who know me, aren't there right now. It's kind of overwhelming. And then his 2 best friends are in the other class. There's 2 classes per grade at his elementary school. So he's acknowledging all of this. And, there's other dynamics that I'm thinking about as a mom. Like, he was sick a couple days last week. The first 2 weeks of school were kind of a joke. One was 3 days, one was 2 days, various reasons from the school perspective. Like, why are we doing this to children? But I'm getting curious instead of getting furious, right? Instead of entering that place of like, I've got to have control, I'm pausing and I'm going, what is going on for my sweet guy? What is happening here? Right. And he says all that. And I said, that makes a lot of sense. And I kept just saying over and over, we're going to figure this out, kid. We're going to figure this out. These feelings you're having right now, they're big and they're overwhelming, and they are not going to stay for this whole school year. Like, your brain is telling you right now, like, this is never going to end, or the only way for it to end is if I stay home and I never go to school. I know that feeling, but that's not the truth. The truth is we're going to figure it out. So I emailed his teacher while he was laying there. I let him look at the email, and we made a plan that I'm going to meet with his teacher and we're going to try and figure out what we can do as a team to help him feel more confident about being in the classroom this year. And this is a kid who's always loved school. So we'll have to figure out how we get that spark back, right? But I'm entering that conflict and I'm going, what is it we need to know? And I'm getting curious about my reactions, curious about his reactions, so that the feelings can be honored, welcomed, and then subside some. He was still a little upset, but by the time we got to school, he was okay. He said bye. And I said, you got this.
Wow, you rocked it. And, in your story, I really like how you said that we're going to figure this out, as opposed to like, you're just it's really easy to dismiss kids' emotions. And in the book, you go through, just for the parents listening, there's 4 steps, which you obviously just went through: active listening to figure out what the problem was, calm communicating, respectful responding, and receiving repair. And it's like, you're gonna come back to this. You're not gonna leave it. You're not gonna have him stuff his feelings. And yet, at the same time, you've given him confidence that we're gonna get through this, as opposed to like, well, I hope you figure it out. Because, there's problem solving where you're turning it back to the kid. And at some ages, you do release it. And at other ages, depending on how, level of maturity, sometimes you're going to work with them and the teacher in order to give them the skills in order to move forward. So I like that. Thanks for that example. That was awesome. In your book, one of the things that you cover is a self-confidence recipe. Can you tell that I read your book?
That's amazing.
So fun. And I love the quote. And it says, a child can only become confident in their self if they are first able to be confident in the care of others. And in your situation with your son's teachers, having the 3 previous teachers having abandoned him in his mind, it's like his self-confidence, got undermined. And you recognizing that and taking some positive steps forward, like, great. Do you have any other comments about that self-confidence loop that,
well, I think just
reinforcing
it's just a reminder to all of us that we're relational creatures. And we want our kids to get to a place where their sense of self is fairly solid and they can handle when people are unkind to them or, misunderstand them. We want that, but the building blocks to that are having people in their world that consistently show up for them. Because over time, what gets internalized in human development is, I matter, I have people, I am valuable to other people. And that is what creates that courage to go out into the world. As I may have had insecure attachments with my caregivers growing up with my parents, but there was an element of always being wanted in the room. I could feel that from them, even though they were struggling to manage their emotions and addictions and mental health stuff. I knew I was valuable, and then they also brought other people into my world, whether it's teachers, whoever, who also made me feel like I had a voice. And I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if I didn't have those relational experiences. If instead I had people in my world that were like, you're kind of dramatic, you got to be quiet, kid, right? Like, stop that. I don't know. Would I be here? Probably not. Like, our relational experiences are huge in how we form our sense of ourself and our value in the world.
Mm-hmm. What do you say to parents who come to you and they say, my I'll pick on
Mhm. Mhm.
teenagers or teenagers, my 6th grade girl or my 7th grade boy or high school, whatever, and they have no
Mm.
attachment.
They feel like
They
they're not
feel that their
attached.
kid is not
Yes.
attached.
Well,
Yeah. What
I would
what
get
would you
curious
say?
there too. I would say when your child throughout the years has felt tender, distressed, or overwhelmed, what have you been able to do in response to that? What was your natural reaction? Was it to try to get them to get over it because that's what you were taught? You're fine, it's fine, let's go, let's move on, let's not spend too much time on this, like let's not focus on the negative, because that probably left your child feeling like if they reach for you, they're going to be dismissed. Their emotions will be dismissed. So we want to think about how do we repair that? And it's probably about going to that kid and saying, you know what? I think I kind of messed something up in our relationship. And I just want to say, I'm going to be doing something different going forward. And I totally get if it takes you some time to build trust in me again. But I realized I was trying to help you by moving you away from what you were feeling. And that meant that I was moving away from what you were feeling. And you probably felt left pretty alone in your feelings. And that's because that's what my parents did with me, or that's what in my life. And I'm going to start learning how to handle my feelings more, and which means I'm going to be handling your feelings more. So I just wanted you to know I'm going to be doing stuff different moving forward. And you have every right to be angry, annoyed, and distrustful that I wasn't able to do that earlier. And you can do that
Mm,
same conversation around, I have overreacted to your feelings with my anxiety about your feelings. I think when you brought me something, I've blown it up, maybe even bigger than it was for you, because I didn't want you to feel alone in your feelings, because that's how I felt growing up. But instead, I think you felt kind of intruded upon by my anxiety or my response to what you were feeling. I wasn't able to manage my feelings in the face of your feelings, and they took over the conversation most of the time. So I'm going to work on really
mhm.
learning how to center myself and calm myself so that I can actually hear what you're feeling at the volume you're feeling it, and not at what I think you might be feeling. So we're acknowledging
Mhm.
what we did, how we did it, and then working on repairing that pattern to be more secure.
Yeah. And that that sounds so sensible for people who know that they've been hurt by their own
Mhm.
attachments growing up and stuff like that. I have situations that happens pretty regularly where there are families that I'm working with, and the parents are pretty even.
Mhm.
They're pretty, you know, good about passing
Mhm.
problems back and stuff like that, and their kids still go off the anxiety
Yeah,
deep
I
end.
mean,
And they're like,
like what just happened?
"Okay, what do we
Yeah.
do, Mary?" It's
Well, we're
like
all wired differently. So, whenever I'm working with families, I'm thinking, okay, what is nature? What is your child's temperament? The personality that they've been genetically inborn with. And what is nurture? The dynamic that's been created in their relationship to you. And sometimes our kids are highly sensitive. I joke that I have 3 kids, and I joke that I have 2.5 highly sensitive kids. One of my kids is, like, somewhere in the middle, but the other 2 are pretty highly sensitive. And, that's just an adaptation in human genome that helps us to survive as a species. If there's around 20% of a population that's highly sensitive, then they sort of act as this protective alert system. Elaine Aron wrote the book, The
Mm,
Highly Sensitive Person. She also wrote The Highly Sensitive Child. She's done a lot of research on this temperament. So sometimes, we're looking at, hey, maybe it isn't about the way we're relating to our child. Maybe it's about our expectations of our child. So we're expecting our child to be a cool cucumber because maybe we are a cool cucumber, but they aren't wired that same way. And so then we adjust and we learn about high sensitivity and we learn how to accept that. And I like to think of big emotional surges as waves. They come up, they go down. Some waves are really big and they take a while to crest and hit the shore. Other waves are kind of smaller. And all of our kids have different emotional wave patterns. So if you have a kid with a really big emotional wave pattern, you want to start learning how to surf those bigger waves. And the expectation is it's going to take a while, longer than maybe it takes me in my own world or my other kid in their world. But that doesn't mean they're doing something wrong or I'm doing something wrong. It means they just are a deep
mhm.
feeler, and that's okay.
Yeah, and I think the couple that I'm thinking of, their daughter falls into
Mhm.
that category of she has really deep feelings, and as parents, we kind of think, what are we doing
Yeah.
wrong? And I love how you reassure us that it's okay that our kid has big emotions and we
Yes.
gotta figure out how to
Well, it's a
strategize
superpower,
or like
honestly.
read a
Kids
book.
who are highly sensitive are some of the most creative and empathetic humans that we have on earth. And when we don't
Mhm.
overreact or underreact to their emotional world, they learn how to manage that superpower over time. My most sensitive child, I mean, if you had been
Mhm.
around us when she was 2 and 3 years old, I definitely remember my family and other people looking at me in my responsiveness to her and thinking, oh Lord, this child is going to be a real weenie, right? Like the rest of her life, she's never going to handle her feelings because I was really like, oh, you're so sad about someone looking at you sideways. I mean, it was like everything overwhelmed her nervous system. And at 4.5, it's quite incredible the transformation that's already happened for her. And I've had different people, but especially my husband, he's like, man, the proof is in the pudding here. Like when we offer calm, caring response to our children's emotional states, whether we think they are logical, illogical, too much or too small, they learn to no longer fear what they're feeling. And so they can handle it better. And she's just become one of the most workable, flexible kids. And, a year and a half ago, no one would have seen that coming. And thank goodness I knew the research because I
Oh.
could just stay in it. And I held my highly sensitive clients in my mind, like I know it will not help my child to tell her to stop reacting. She can't help it. It's about helping her have this
Mhm.
connection in that emotional moment so that she finds emotions as the path to connection and therefore doesn't double react to what she's feeling. But
Mhm.
it's hard. It is hard.
Nice.
And
I
there
like
were some
that.
trying times. I mean, we would joke. My husband would say, she's breaking my brain. And I would say, I know, me too. Because it took so much effort. But now it's like, wow, thank goodness we did that.
Yeah. That's awesome. Congratulations. And as raising my kids, I said one was the more needy one and the other one
Mhm.
was pretty even. And it's like I learned so much and I love them so much and they're doing so great, and I was able to launch
Mhm.
them and they're even on podcast 50. My fans
That's so
wanted me to interview
fun.
them and find out, hey, how did Mary really do? And it just really shows that one, that a parent, even with older kids,
Yes.
can change, which I think is really motivational because a lot of people hit, especially the tween years or the high school years, and they're like, "Oh, I've just
Yes.
lost everything, no connect." It's
No.
like, you can change, just like you said earlier, where it's like, you gotta sometimes come up and change how you're doing things with your kid and figuring out how to get
Yes.
closer. Um, I would love to have you comment, also on the transitions about attachment.
Mhm.
You and I were talking earlier about different ages, different
Yes.
stages of that secure attachment,
Yes.
and comment and give advice on how to get through
Yes.
it.
Well, one way to think of it is our attachment instinct allows us to develop in a way that we can have really complex mental formation. So, what that means is this: we're born as slugs. No baby can protect themselves, survive, forage for food at all out of the birth canal, right? So, we are entirely dependent on caregivers early on in our development. And that attachment part functions to keep us alive, to help us thrive, right? And builds that bond for us. But then as we develop some capacity, right? So, our kids can now run across the room as toddlers. And what they need from us is different at that stage than what they needed as infants. As infants, they really need us to be as responsive as we can, right? And we can't be perfectly responsive all the time, but as responsive as we can. When they hit toddlerhood, they're learning new things. They're acquiring language, they're acquiring motor skills. So they need us to be responsive and caring, but they also need us to be on our toes, thinking about how to keep them safe and protect them as they walk around the environment and stick their fingers into things, right? So we're thinking about setting limits, we're thinking about cultivating structure as well as nurture, right? Our babies don't need us to say, well, no, I'm sorry that that's not how you get your snack. If you're crying, they don't need that. But our toddlers do need us to start to teach them, our food stays on our plate, right? Like, so we're creating that structure while we still give that emotional nurture. But over time, what happens is we shift from being primarily a safe haven for our children's tenderness and emotions to increasing the amount of time we spend as their secure base, which means I am giving you support and encouragement to go out and make your own mistakes, learn your own lessons, figure things out. And at the beginning, like in toddlerhood, that's like across the other side of the room. But as they get to be tweens and teens, we're really shifting them into having a lot more ownership over the consequences that they face, right? Instead of us determining what they do and they don't do, they're determining more of that. And our job is not as much to be cultivating the structure as it is releasing the reins. And then as they get into their late adolescence, what starts happening, we were talking about this briefly before we started recording, is that very complexly beautiful, hopeful, and sad experience where our kids begin to bond deeply with other people. We call that the attachment transfer. So they go from us being their primary place of attachment to their peers slowly becoming that. And then they launch into adulthood. And in the long term, we still function as an attachment figure for their whole lives. No one forgets that they had parents, right? Our parents are huge in our lives. But that primary place of identity and belonging usually goes to best friends and sweethearts and spouses. And so we no longer are in that center. And it's a strange shift to make, to go from my job is to be available to you deeply, profoundly, minute to minute, day by day, to now my job is to accept that you no longer need me in that particular way. And you're using other people for the thing I used to do for you.
Yeah. That's where I am. I told you. It's like, and it's hard, and I have to do a mental shift of like, I have to be happy for them that they have found really significant people in their lives. One of my sons is married, and the other will someday married to the woman that he's been dating a long time. But at the same time, it's like, it's so wonderful when they call home and say, "Hey, what about this?" Or, if my husband has to help with doing an electrical job at their house or help garden or whatever. It's just such an honor of like, okay, you're right. The attachment's still there. They still love us. And but it's a transition. So, Eli, thanks so much for being here. What a great discussion. So many great ideas. Thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It was so good to be with you.
Parents, I want you to look in my podcast notes for the links to Eli's book and her social media. I'll even put a YouTube link to her Good Morning America guest spot. She's amazing. Such a great resource. Let me know if you have questions, and feel free to contact me, Mary at parentingdecoded.com. Have a blessed rest of your day.